I have reviewed the pre-sentence investigation and carefully considered all the facts of the case and the law, but my comments are actually going to be very brief because most of it's going to be in writing. I have a 22-page memorandum that is going to be attached to the sentencing order. And why am I doing it in writing? To emphasize the fact that determining the appropriate sentence in any case, and in this case, is a legal analysis. It's applying the rule of law to the facts of an individual and specific case. And that is why, as opposed to trying to being profound here on the record, I prefer that you read the legal analysis that explains how I determined the sentence in this case. What the case is, or what the sentence is not based on, is emotion or sympathy. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge the deep and tremendous pain that all the families are feeling, especially the Floyd family. You have our sympathies. And I acknowledge and hear the pain that you are feeling. I acknowledge the pain not only of those in this courtroom, but the Floyd family who are outside this courtroom and other members of the community. It has been painful throughout Hennepin County, throughout the state of Minnesota, and even the country. But most importantly, we need to recognize the pain of the Floyd family. I'm not going to attempt to be profound or clever because it's not the appropriate time. I'm not basing my sentence also on public opinion. I'm not basing it on any attempt to send any messages. A trial court judge, the job of a trial court judge is to apply the law to specific facts and to deal with individual cases. And so, Mr. Chauvin, as to count one, based on the verdict of the jury finding you guilty of unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony under Minnesota Statute 609.19 subdivision 2 paren 1, it is the judgment of the court that you now stand convicted of that offense. Pursuant to Minnesota Statute section 609.04, counts 2 and 3 will remain unadjudicated as they are lesser offenses of count 1. As sentence for count 1, the court commits you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 270 months. That's 270. That is a 10-year addition to the presumptive sentence of 150 months. This is based on your abuse of a position of trust and authority, and also the particular cruelty shown to George Floyd. You are granted credit for 199 days already served. Pay the mandatory surcharge of $78 to be paid from prison wages. You're prohibited from possessing firearms, ammunition, or explosives for the remainder of your life. Provide a DNA sample as required by law. Register as a predatory offender as required by law. And you will receive a copy of the order and also the attached memorandum explaining the court's analysis. Anything further from the state?
If this needs to be said, we just ask that it be executed forthwith.
Defendant is remanded to the custody of the sheriff to be transported back to the DOC or whichever custody is currently holding him. Anything from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Judge Peter Cahill has just announced the sentence of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, 22.5 years. Jamie Yuccas of CBS has covered this court case from the very beginning. She joins us now from Minneapolis. Jamie, set the scene. If there's any reaction out there or what you have your own reaction based on what you heard before this verdict being announced there in Minneapolis.
Well, I think everyone, including the crowd behind me in front of the Government Center, was surprised when Derek Chauvin's mother came up and addressed the courtroom. Many people there not happy about it. She obviously had a very tough time going through. Derek Chauvin also addressing very briefly, could not make a large statement, said that he has some legal issues that he has to clear up before he makes a formal public statement, but did say that he did feel remorse for the Floyd family. That's the first time we have heard him say something like that. I believe you're seeing pictures from right outside the courthouse right now where some demonstrators had gathered. 22 and a half years was what many people thought would in fact happen. They thought anywhere from 20 to 25 because of those aggravating factors that the judge would take into consideration. It's interesting that he noted in the particular cruelty that was laid upon George Floyd during the 9.5 minutes that Derek Chauvin was on Floyd's neck as the aggravating factor that he took into account. That's something that we will take a look at, many years to come as to how he made this decision. Again, he said that he has a 22-page written statement that he's going to add to what happened today with the sentencing. So we will see in detail. That was a little bit of a surprise too, Major, that he didn't come out. Many legal experts had thought that he would give very detailed and specific reasons as to why he came to that 22.5-year sentence. Again, that's about 10 years longer than the Minnesota state guidelines would have given Derek Chauvin based on the fact that he had no prior criminal record. His attorney, Eric Nelson, the defense attorney, had stated that he is concerned about Derek Chauvin's safety. That was a reason that the defense had asked for probation in this case with time served. Now, Derek Chauvin will get credit for about 199 days. That's how long he's been in prison. We know he's in solitary confinement at this point. And again, as the sentence was being read, it was interesting to note that he did not show much emotion in this case. From start to finish. Major?
Jamie Yuccas, thank you very much. CBS News legal contributor and civil rights attorney Alexis Hoag joins us. Alexis, the prosecution asked for 30 years. The judge handed down 22.5 years. He said that sentence was not based on emotion, sympathy, public opinion, or messaging. Your reaction?
Yeah, good afternoon, Major. I can't say that I'm surprised by this sentence. I think back to former police officer in Minnesota, Mohammed Noor, who was actually convicted of a lesser account, so third-degree murder, and received a 12.5-year sentence. And so I knew going into today, because Chauvin was convicted of a greater crime, second-degree murder, that he would receive longer than 12.5 years. And even though Judge Cahill did not speak to emotion and sentiment, this is a very carefully and closely watched case, not just in Minnesota, but all around this nation and really around the world. And I think he felt the weight of that. And he very much is still within the framework of what Minnesota law allows for him to sentence Mr. Chauvin. So I can't say that I'm surprised, and I'm eager to read this 22-page memo.
I'm sure you are. Alexis, before I let you go, for those who would have liked to have seen 30 years or maybe even the maximum of 40 years because they considered this crime so brutal, what would you say to them as they work through the processing of this announced sentence?
Even with the convictions that we heard in April at the conclusion of the trial, the convictions, the sentence, they don't really speak to the underlying concerns that still exist, which is that Black people, brown people, people of color experience greater degrees of violence when they have contact with the criminal legal system, with police officers. And so these are unaddressed issues that this sentence, even the maximum amount of sentence, wouldn't address. And so I think it's so important to focus on moving forward for Mr. Floyd's family. I'm hopeful that this sentence gives them some amount of relief, but it doesn't solve our problems. And this is why I am heartened to see the crowds, the vocal crowds in Minneapolis that are as concerned and as committed to really overhauling the way that police officers interact with the public.
Thank you very much. I want to bring in now CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Rikki, it's an oversimplified question to say, what's your reaction? But I'm going to do it anyway. What's your reaction?
My reaction is that I am not surprised by the sentence. I think many of us who have taken our lives and dealt with the criminal justice system as both prosecutors and defenders, as I have, would have expected a sentence between 20 and 30 years. So he was well within that range. There was not really a path to give Derek Chauvin the presumptive sentence in light of the aggravators that were put forth by the prosecution and explained by the prosecutor today, particularly the act of cruelty of Derek Chauvin, as well as looking at his abuse of authority. I thought the prosecutor's argument was highly persuasive in court about the fact that when you have someone in custody, he is in your care, and that Derek Chauvin did not show care to George Floyd. I think that there will be people who are disappointed that he did not get this quote-unquote maximum, which is 30 years, but certainly 22 and a half years is a very substantial sentence when, without the aggravators, unintentional murder, which is the conviction in this case of second-degree felony murder, unintentional murder, that really would have carried a presumptive of 12 and a half. I think that people like lawyers and academics will think that the sentence was very fair. People in the community might not.
Rikki, I want to have you listen, and the audience as well, to Derek Chauvin. He spoke ever so briefly. It was a dramatic and brief moment within the courtroom. He is still appealing his conviction, probably one of the reasons his comments were so brief, but he did, for the first time, address the Floyd family. Let's listen.
I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
Rikki, I'm not trying to ask you the most difficult question here, which is, what is that about? But do you think that there's anything in the totality of the condolences, but also there's going to be more information that might give you some peace of mind? I'm just not sure how that would land with the Floyd family. It seems like a one and the other kind of thing.
Well, it's really, I think, a bizarre statement, and I think that's kind coming from me. I think it would have been fine if all he said was that he wanted to give his condolences to the Floyd family. We would have heard him say that. I don't think it would make any difference to the Floyd family, nor perhaps should it make any difference, but at least it would be some kind of contrition. But this little carrot and stick approach of saying, well, there's more to come, I just found that not only bizarre, it's almost in its own way sadistic. It's like a nasty tease. If I were his lawyer and had vetted what he was going to say, I would have never permitted him to utter that second or third sentence. It was, I guess, the phrase that we have shared amongst ourselves is that it's like gaslighting. It was not only not in good taste, it was about the last thing that the Floyd family and all of their grieving needed today.
Right. I don't think anyone in that courtroom expected Derek Chauvin to basically say, stay tuned. Rikki Klieman, thank you so much for your help. I want to bring in Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, CBS News contributor and lead anti-racist scholar. Dr. Kendi, you've probably watched the proceedings. Your overall assessment?
Well, first, I'm hoping that the Floyd family, that this sentencing today could ease some of their grieving. I'm certainly, I thought that he should have gotten more years in prison, and the reason being is because one of the ways we should consider these types of cases is if George Floyd would have been convicted of unintentional murder of Derek Chauvin, would he have only gotten 22 and a half years? You know, that's the type of equal punishment that I think people in the community are looking for. But at the same time, it is so rare for a police officer to be convicted and sentenced for this long. And so I'm hoping that it certainly provides some ease for the Floyd family.
Dr. Kendi, I want to ask you about the way this whole case began. You know, I know, many of the American people know the sanitized version the Minneapolis Police Department originally released about George Floyd's death. That was not true. That was a non-factual assertion of what happened. That was blown up by the facts and citizens who were there, who recorded this for all time on their cell phone video. That part of this story is somewhat forgotten, but it seems crucial to me as we look at the arc of what this is and what it may represent in the future. I'd like your thoughts on that.
Major, I'm happy you reminded us of that, because when we think of the murder of George Floyd, we're not going to be able to separate it from the series of demonstrations, you know, millions of people from coast to coast, from the largest of cities to the smallest of towns, people of all races and ages who came together and demonstrated, you know, against racism and police violence, who saw the murder of George Floyd in all of its horror, and it drove them to speak out and to call forth for a complete transformation of our, you know, criminal legal system. And that may not have happened, right, if the official report, the official police report would have held the day. And I think it just allows us to really step back. And unfortunately, when there is police violence, is it possible for us to believe the word of the police? And I think this case shows us that it's not.
Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, I want to thank you very much for joining us once again to remind the audience what just happened. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin has been sentenced to 22.5 years for second-degree murder in the death of George Floyd. Our coverage of this ongoing story continues, of course, on our 24-hour streaming service. That is CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or download our CBS News app on your phone or connected TV. There will be more on your local news on this CBS station and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Major Garrett in Washington.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.